Enjoy the session.
Welcome back to this very nice Anna Tramontano auditorium. It is a real pleasure to introduce today the last keynote speaker, Professor Ana Teresa Freitas. Professor Freitas has, I think, a very unique profile, not only because she has been a referent in bioinformatics in her homeland in Portugal. She has published in academia over 120 articles in peer-reviewed journals, and she has actually been a representative of Portugal in the Elixir consortium, but also because her very successful career at the industry. In fact, in 2013, she co-founded a company called Heart Genomics that she has led very successfully for over almost 10 years as a CEO. Recently, she moved back to academia, and she is currently holding a position as full professor at the Computer and Engineering Department at the University of Lisbon, and is also a senior researcher at the INESC ID Center at Lisbon. With these outstanding achievements, I'm sure you are going to enjoy the talk she will be presenting today here at the ECCB about personalized medicine in the era of artificial intelligence. It's all yours, Anna.
Fatima, thank you for the introduction. I also would like to thank you for the organizers for this invitation, Alfonso and Salvador Gutierrez. I will try to bring some vision and provocative thoughts, and also the situation that industry is facing nowadays, so the clinical practice, what they are really facing, and how they can really improve their practice based on the work that we and you are doing at the academia. But our academia really should push the data a little bit forward to help industry to develop new products. It's really impressive, this audience. So I will start with this image. I like this image a lot because I think it really brings together a lot of insights about the data that we need to use in clinics nowadays, but also behavior, people behavior. And what you see there is like a big brain representing AI or data integration. You see data from medical files, image, therapeutics, so pharmacogenomics is also here represented. And you see healthcare professionals. You see persons, people. And you can see that woman over there that has a watch. So the smartwatch here represents how we can have access to a lot of tools that can do self-tracking, self-tracking devices that are very relevant to healthcare and to provide us insights about our health at any moment. But at the same time, I don't think, yes, we have a pointer. You see a healthcare professional here dealing with the medical files, medical records, and you see again here some conversation between a person and a healthcare professional. And you see that in this image, the person is not lying in a bed like a patient, because that person is not a patient, is a person that is in a medical doctor consultation, because that person is not in a disease state, is in a healthy state, and is talking with the doctor to discuss a possible situation, behavior, potential of developing a specific condition. And this is very relevant for medical doctors, because if we are going to push this mindset of preventive medicine, of personalized medicine, healthcare professionals will start to deal more and more, not with patients, but with persons that are healthy and that they have different behaviors when they are in front to a healthcare professional. So coming back to AI. So you know that AI started some decades ago, and during these last decades, AI suffered many, or went through many winters and summers. And we are in a summer for AI now, and we are in this summer because we have here three main pillars that are supporting these new developments. So the new machine learning algorithm, in particular, deep learning technologies that are really improving the way or bringing us results that are sometimes unexpected. We have data, so the access to a lot of data that are very useful for these algorithms to learn from, and we have access to supercomputing, and this is of course mandatory to run these algorithms and for them to be able to learn something. But at the same time, not only in healthcare, but around many areas, there are a lot of topics that are now being raised, and they are particularly relevant in healthcare. When we talk about using deep learning algorithms, and not just machine learning algorithms, because there is a panoply of machine learning algorithms, but in the case of new deep learning algorithms, the topics that came to the table are always around explainability, transparency. Why? Because these algorithms are really impressive, but they are not so clear in the way they explain or they get to their solutions when we compare to other solutions in AI. And for the healthcare set, the explainability is a major thing for medical doctors to deal with. Then when we look at the data, of course, if we are going to learn from data, we need to be sure that we can trust the data, that the data is accurate, that is comprehensive. And comprehensive is a major thing in genomics, because this means that I'm going to train my algorithms in genetics data or genomics data that can be used as a tool to answer to many populations, and we are all different. We have different characteristics. So if we don't cover this world of data, we will develop models that are useful, for example, in Europe, but could not be useful in other geographies. Then, of course, the data needs to be accessible, shareable, and most of all, used. What I see, and I saw for many years in the industry, is that the hospitals are full of data, medical doctors are full of data, healthcare professionals have a lot of data, but the point is that they don't use the data. The data is just there. And if 20 years ago we could say that, okay, most of the data is still written in paper, it's difficult to extract, the point is nowadays the data is still written sometimes in papers and we cannot extract. Okay, so we are still facing a lot of problems when we try to bring the data that is produced in a clinical routine to a point that we can really use the data. Then when we talk about supercomputer infrastructure, not all geographies, not all countries perhaps have access to these facilities. So this means that we need to use and share this kind of resources. But what about the location of these resources? What about the ownership of the data that are, or the servers that are now processing this data? Okay, we have now a conflict in Europe. Suppose that the data was in one of those countries. How can we deal with this? So this is a major thing for countries that cannot really invest in this kind of infrastructure and need to rely on other countries' support. And AI is really transforming the clinical practice in 4 main areas. Of course, medical research is part of this thing, but now I'm more focused on the clinical practice. And in the clinical practice, we have all the field of medical imaging. And as you know, and I think the medical imaging algorithms are nowadays so accurate in many situations, then sometimes it's more reliable to trust the algorithm than a medical doctor that has no such long years of training. So last 2 weeks ago, I gave a course on one of the medical schools in Lisbon, and I asked the new medical doctors, the first year students, who is going to go for radiology? And no one raised their hands. And I say, okay, we're not going to have radiologists in the future, so please wait, perhaps there are other news here for you. Medical process optimization. This is a major thing in hospitals where AI can really play a role. I don't know if you know that if you have a surgery programmed for 11 a.m., the hospital started programming your surgery at 6 a.m. because there's so many processes that need to be in place when you start your surgery that really there's a team working many hours before for everything to be there when the patient goes to the surgery room. Medical diagnosis. Okay, here is where genomics really playing a big difference. And this is one of the fields that I will explore in my talk today. And of course, medical education. I don't know if you had the chance to go to one hospital that is using these new techniques using robotics and simulation to train medical doctors without a patient body. That is really very impressive. We have hospitals in Portugal where they have models that can cry, that can give birth, that can inject and use therapeutics. And so it's really impressive what AI can do in the medical doctor training. And when we see all of this, everybody claims, okay, AI in clinical practice is having already a huge impact. But at the same time, they raise this kind of issues as barriers. So once again, safety and transparency. And the point is, people ask many times, okay, so at what extent the medical doctor should explain to the patient that he's using AI algorithm? And at what extent the medical doctor should disclose that he doesn't understand why he's using that guideline from the algorithm? But that was the recommendation. But the point, I see many times all these questions coming to the table, but the point is, let's think about today, what we are doing today. When we go to a medical doctor, are we asking these questions? A linear regression is a machine learning algorithm. Are we asking to the medical doctor these questions about the algorithms that we are using for medical signal or for even to support diagnosis or for data interpretation? So sometimes I see questions being raised regarding AI, but at the same time, they are not new. They are just sometimes being raised to show that we should be worried about, but the questions are already there. Data transparency. Data transparency, for me, it's not, or data privacy, it's not really an issue because, of course, we need to deal with data privacy. But data privacy is a topic that we are already dealing with in finance, security, many other fields. So the technologies are there, we need to use them, and we cannot avoid to use the data because of this kind of worries. And this last one, informed consent use. Informed consent, the definition of an informed consent, it's something very clear. But of course now, and specifically in the fields that here, the people that are here work, that is, for example, population genomic studies, what is an informed consent? What is an informed consent for full genome sequences that I'm going to use for a lifetime? Okay. The new GDPR in Europe, that is the new regulation for data protection, says that when the patient gives the informed consent, he needs to know the exact use of the data. How can we do this if we are just sequencing full genomes for research or even for medical diagnosis? What I can tell you is that, of course, this topic is very relevant, but in 10 years in the industry, I never saw a patient coming back to ask us for removing the informed consent, or not giving the informed consent, or not asking for, if we're able to find new insights, to come back to that person to provide guidance. In Portugal, everybody is more or less open to this. Of course, I know other geographies where this is not like this. People are afraid. So that's why we need to address this. Very relevant for the ones that are developing AI software. In 2020, the European Commission published a white paper about AI. And it is written, that is vital, that European AI is based on our fundamental values and rights such as human dignity, protection and privacy. But in 2021, the Artificial Intelligence Act that is already in place says that and classifies medical tools or medical software most as high-risk applications. And for high-risk applications, what is written, the decision was that medical AI requires human assessment before any action is taken on their basis. Okay, so if we are developing software based on AI, using AI technologies to be used in clinical practice, we need to have this in mind, because there need to have a possibility to interact with the healthcare professional, because at the end of the day, the healthcare professional is the one that will take the responsibility for the decision or for the therapeutics. This was about AI and how it is moving and developing in healthcare. But I would like also to call your attention for what is going on healthcare without looking at AI. There is a very relevant project in Europe, the EU Innovative Medicines Initiative. That is an initiative that is trying to test in the clinical practice new approaches for the medicine that we are developing nowadays. And the goal is to shift for a medicine that is reactive to disease to a medicine that cares the patient and is patient-centered. There are three main approaches. One that is the named patient-centered care, the other one that is value-based care, and the other one that is this P4 medicine. And I will describe a little bit all of them. The P4 is not such an approach to manage the healthcare system in general, it's more how to deal with the data and overlaps with the other two. When we go to the patient-centered, this means that the hospitals, when they are organizing themselves to provide healthcare, to provide care, they need to take into consideration all these aspects. There are 8 dimensions to take into consideration. And you see it's respect for patient values, preferences, and expressed needs, information and education, access to care, of course, emotional support relative to fear and anxiety, involvement of family and friends, the continuity of the care from the hospital to home, the physical comfort and coordination of care. The proposal that is value-based is more focused on the outcomes. It overlaps, it also considers patient-centeredness as one of the outcomes, or as one of the aspects, but it's not only about patient-centeredness. It also considered costs. So, as you can see, we also have several layers: understand shared healthcare needs, design solutions to improve health outcomes, and costs is also one of the outcomes, integrate learning teams, measure healthcare outcomes and costs, expand partnerships. And we can think, okay, those are just proposals, what's going on? And the point is that it's not just proposals. There are already implementations in Europe with very interesting results. I just leave you here with 2 or 3 examples. This one from the Netherlands. The Netherlands, I don't know who is here from the Netherlands, perhaps a lot of people. There's a lot of hospitals that are coming together to implement this vision of patient-centeredness, and this paper provides a very relevant results about the outcomes, and though it was possible to reduce costs and improve the outcomes. There is already, regarding value-based healthcare, a position paper from EU regarding how to implement, and I will give you an example. Oops. Why this is not going? Okay. And an example of one of the projects to implement it in project that was considered and evaluated as very innovative. It was recognized as very innovative. That was on the eye field or therapeutics for cataract surgery. That was also value-based and following those principles. So these approaches are being tested in Europe. They are patient-centered, they are more focused on the patient, but they are not considering aspects like prevention or personal in the way that perhaps we would like to. That's why this P4 or 4P medicine is needed. What is this? This is a medicine that is predictive, preventive, personalized, and participatory. It's a kind of systems biology vision for the data in medicine. And the participatory aspect is very relevant, and it's something that, of course, aligns with the patient-centeredness and value-based care. And I will just provide you this picture. This is the data that we used to deal with in the 20th century. And I would like that our medicine in the 21st century could be different, to really lead us in the direction of the P4 medicine, or the 4P medicine. So in the 20th century, doctors used to deal with this data. That is the clinical data, lab tests, behavioral and family history, medical images, and signals. But nowadays we have this data. We have data about genomics from birth, pharmacogenomics from birth, self-lab tests. Now self-lab tests are becoming more and more relevant. Remember COVID. When COVID started, we could only do a PCR test in a lab to understand if we were contaminated or no. Everybody is doing the self-tests at home nowadays. Of course, it's not a PCR, but it's a test that is accepted to diagnosis. And then self-tracking. Self-tracking all the devices that we can develop that can give us immediately biosignals about the state that we are at that moment. And of course, microbiome. Microbiome is already playing a role. Of course, in science, we know the importance and the relevance of the microbiome. In the clinical environment, doctors are becoming a little bit aware. But one of the healthcare professions, a group of healthcare professions that are really becoming aware on the opportunity of using this data is nutritionists. Nutritionists are really willing to deal with this data because they have a number of issues when they are treating obesity, and the microbiome data can really help. The point is that we have access. It's quite simple nowadays to do a microbiome test, but it's really very difficult to make the translation of that knowledge for the clinical practice. So, and the point is that when disease comes, because disease will come, we can go to that side and use this data, but what we should do is to profit from the data that we have on the left to keep everyone healthy in that specific state. And why is this important? First of all, because we are really spending a lot of money in healthcare. And this will not be reduced. This is increasing. We have in Europe a very aging population. And as you know, as we know, when we go older, we start to use more and more healthcare services. But more relevant than this, nowadays we have access to immense therapeutics that are very expensive. So we cannot treat everybody with the same, we cannot give to everyone the same opportunities to be treated with the best therapeutics that exist. So this means that to give that opportunity to those that really need, we need to develop a medicine and a strategy where most of us are healthy for the majority of the time in our lives. And that's why I would like to show you this graph about longevity. So life expectancy is a good parameter to measure the health of a specific population. And in Portugal, we are quite well regarding this life expectancy. That is the red curve. So what we see is that in the mid nowadays, so 2018, our life expectancy is 82 years old. But 70 years ago, it was 49 years old. So things improved a lot. Why? Because we developed a national healthcare system, because we gave the opportunity to people to eat and live in a better way, so life expectancy increased a lot. But if I go there to this data and try to model what happened until those points where we see the curves starting to increase, I can try to use this model for healthcare until the beginning of the 20th century. Until the beginning of the 20th century, so before vaccines and antibiotics and pumping. So what we could expect was something like this. Almost limited of non-existent healthcare and medication. People were born healthy, and suddenly, for some reason, disease or accident, they will immediately die because there was no possibility to use medication. And this was more or less, the average was more or less between 35 and 45 years old. The model that we developed during the 20th century was this one, that I will call longevity 2.0. So longevity 2.0 is what we have nowadays. We manage disease and physical function. Because the point is that as we get older, we are managing the disease. We are accumulating many, many disorders, and we are trying to manage disease. We are not healthy. We are living longer, but that's something different. So I think and I really believe that nowadays we have the tools to develop longevity 3.0. And longevity 3.0 for me, it's this. We die healthy as late as possible. So we shift from living longer to living longer and living better and living well. But to do this, we really need to rely on genomics. We really need to rely on personalized medicine and behavior. Because, as you know or may expect, there's a lot of conditions that we can understand. All genomics contribute to those conditions, but they don't have 100% penetrance. They are triggers that can be triggered in our behavior with the environment. So if we control our behavior and control it in a way that adjusts to our genomics, we can live longer and healthy. So I came back here to this picture. Why? Because if I look here, you see most of this is about genetics. So this is for us to deal with. This is for us to help to bring to a position where the companies can really use to develop new products to be used in the clinical practice, to be used by people. All the work that we have been done in GWAS analysis is really impressive, is really transformed the way we are seeing genetics nowadays. I started teaching computational biology or working on genetics in computational biology on the 2002, something like that. At some point, it looks like the genomics or genetics was not explaining anything. Why? Because we were focused here on genetic variants that were associated to Mendelian disorders. And what we know nowadays is that almost everything is here on common variants that are associated to common pathologies, to common complex and common diseases. So to deal with this data, what is the big difference? The big difference is here is that these variants are rare. They explain just a small number of conditions. Of course, their penetrance is very high. In this case, they explain many, many conditions. They explain our characteristics, our bodily characteristics, but the impact of each variant is very small. So this means that we need to use a lot of data. And to use a lot of data, how? First this slide. So to use this data, how? By using, so we know that many of these disorders are polygenic, like diabetes, depression, rheumatoid arthritis, cardiovascular disorders, but also other characteristics, weight, insulin resistance, circadian cycle, salt sensitivity, caffeine sensitivity, a lot of things that are very relevant to help us to deal in a daily basis our life. And if we can tell this information to someone, we can really help that person to design a life behavior that will adjust to her or his characteristics. So that's why polygenic risk scores are very relevant. And when polygenic risk scores have been developed and used in the clinical practice and in many tools, many genetic tests that are in the market, they could really improve the way genetics is being used. A polygenic risk score is something like this. So you have here the allelic and the genetic variant, and these beta are the association of the variant to that specific condition. Of course, we are using this polygenic risk score using many, many positions in the genome, but this is just to show the number of publications about polygenic risk scores in the last years. And you see, so this topic is becoming more and more important among the research community, and a pipeline to develop a polygenic risk score is something like this. We start with the whole genome sequencing. If not, most of them are using genotyping, big arrays, smaller arrays, but is using this data. So we can deal with imputation for the uncalled variants, and then based on the summary of the statistics of the GWAS, we can use a number of algorithms to prune, to select the genetic variants that will be used in our model. And then, of course, this figure was retrieved from the Oxford BIG, and it is for body mass index. And what you see is the 22 chromosomes, and this is the logarithm of the minus logarithm of the p-value, so as higher as possible, the highest the association. And what was interesting here is that this gene that appeared here is the FTO gene. The FTO gene was already classified in the past as the obesity gene. Is not the gene that has the most impact in the phenotype, but is of course a gene that is high associated with the pathology. And what the companies can do is just to go to these pictures, have a cut, select the genetic variants, build the polygenic risk score, and compute a score that is a unique value. And these scores are very relevant. Why? Because there are many traits which there are no biomarkers, and the polygenic risk score can really be considered a biomarker. It can be used to understand predisposition to disease even before that specific condition or characteristic being developed. It can be useful to differentiate family members, or when we don't have a family history, okay? And very relevant, we can aggregate the information from millions of genes in just one score that is quite useful to add to the scores or other parameters that we are already using in the clinical practice. Okay? I just highlight here this paper that just came out in 2022 because it's a very interesting paper about how can we use this data and the pipeline to bring this knowledge to the clinical practice. Of course, there is also this polygenic risk score catalog, and this database is becoming more and more relevant. But I don't know if I have here in the audience people that are working with this database. The point now is that the industry cannot still use this database. Why? Because for many traits, we have many publications. There are no consensus about which are the main variants that should always be considered. And this brings a lot of confusion to the market. Companies doing different things, patients not understanding why they're computing that score and not another score. And at the end of my talk, I will explain why this is even a bigger issue. So we should keep improving the way we are providing that data and how the researchers can really give a step more to put this data in a way that the industry can really use it to develop new tools. I will present two cases of two different works where the polygenic risk scores are providing results that are quite impressive and that can be really used in clinics. One is this paper from 2019 that was developed, was published by more than 10 hospitals between US and UK. And this was about to understand obesity. Many data sets were used. The UK Biobank were used to train the models and to build the polygenic risk score. Other data sets were used to understand other conditions. The Framingham data set was a very relevant data set because it has just 3,700 patients, but is a longitudinal study from 18 to 40 years of age. So it can give us the perspective what happened during a lifetime, very relevant for the polygenic risk scores. But I will focus here on this study from the parents and children study that includes 7,800 patients, not patients, kids. It's a longitudinal study that the kids were followed for 18 years, from birth until the age of 18 years. And what was very interesting with this, and the results are really impressive, for me, a computational biologist, I will always look to those pictures and say, wow. This was what happened. For all those kids, a genetic test was done, analyzing 2 million positions in the genome, and some imputation was used. Then all the infants were classified using that score and divided in 10 boxes. So box 10 for the ones that has the highest score in the polygenic risk score, box one for the ones that have the lowest polygenic risk score. So the high risk for obesity, low risk for obesity. And when they were born, these babies, see the difference of their weight. It's almost nothing. It's almost the same, just a couple of grams, so you cannot really differentiate the babies. But as they started to age, see all the curves, the dots started to align. And this was the result at the age of 18. The difference between the pool with the highest polygenic risk score and the low polygenic risk score was 30 kilos. So this is very relevant for a pediatric because this has a huge impact if you control with nutrition, and you need to educate. Nutrition needs to be educated. You need to follow people that has more risk, also to help them to manage the way they eat and the way they behave. So the conclusions of the study are here. So this was the difference. And one of the conclusions is that the effect of the polygenic risk score could be similar to a rare monogenic obesity mutation, so quite relevant and could explain a larger percentage of what they were seeing regarding obesity. Another study is that these vitamin D-related polymorphisms and the vitamin D levels as risk biomarkers for COVID infection severity. I was in this company, okay, so I was part of the study, and two main hospitals in Portugal, one in Lisbon and one in Oporto, and other like the Biodata PT, that is the Elixir node in Portugal. And the point was, in the company, for the last years, we saw that the genetic biomarkers for the vitamin D pathway had a different distribution in the Portuguese population when we compared with the European population. And perhaps you have read a lot about this, that when COVID started, one of the things that the hospitals could see is that the patients that had more severe response to the COVID-19, they have low levels of vitamin D or almost sometimes no vitamin possible level to be measured. So based on this information, we designed this project that was a clinical trial with 570 patients. We measured 19 clinical parameters, 18 genetic variants, and at the end of the day, we had this set of complete records. And based on this, we were able to compute to see what. So based on a number of GWAS analyses, we selected the main genetic variants for the genetic test. We calculated a polygenic risk score. And so, of course, this polygenic risk score that is a bar like this, all those variants, they belong to these ones that are common variants with low impact. And then we went to measure two things. Another thing. So regarding the classification of vitamin D level, we used these guidelines from the Endocrine Society regarding deficiency, insufficiency, and sufficiency. So deficiency less than 20 nanograms, insufficiency here, and sufficiency higher than 30 nanograms per milliliter. And we saw this. We divided our data set in three groups: the group with deficiency levels, the group with sufficient levels, and the group with deficiency, insufficiency, and sufficient levels. And then we compute the score. And the very relevant thing is that you see that people with the highest score, so with the highest predisposition for low levels of vitamin D, they fit here in the deficiency. So the value of the association between the score and the deficiencies was significant, statistical significant. And at the same time, we were able to see that there is a gene that it is the CR7, that is the gene that is responsible to produce vitamin D from the UV light, so for exposing to the sunlight. We had in Portugal a characteristic that predisposes for deficiency of vitamin, so vitamin D, so in the production of vitamin D, and this predisposition was present in more or less 80% of this data set, and in the larger data set with 10,000 genetic tests, it was around the same value, 90%. So, and this compares to 9.7% in the European population, okay? And based on this, we published this paper in scientific reports, and we know that the Portuguese population has a higher genetic susceptibility for vitamin D deficiency. And you can ask me, okay, but you have a lot of sun in your country. Okay, we have these results. 60 to 7% of the Portuguese population has a low level, deficiency level of vitamin D. Of course, it's not only because of our predisposition for vitamin D deficiency, but it's because we are using sun blockers, because we work always inside, and because most of the people nowadays like to take low-fat food. And vitamin D is not a vitamin, it's an hormone, and it's a fat. And if I reduce all the fat that I have in my food, my nutritional intake will be very low. And vitamin D as an hormone has a huge impact in hypertension, diabetes, fertility, bones. So this is a huge hormone for the immune system. Okay? So this is very relevant to correct as a population level to have a measure, like a public measure or healthcare decision to correct this value in the Portuguese population. Let me tell you that this compares with 25% in the Finnish population. So in the north of Europe with less sunlight. By the way, Portugal, we are in the south, but this is not so south. We are already too north when we compare to equator, where the radiation really has a level of incidence that is very high. Okay. So to finish, I would like just to call your attention to this thing that is now a major issue to the companies in Europe in general. That is, and that's why I call polygenic risk scores an industry. There is a new framework for genetic testing in Europe. Is this new regulation? It is in place starting on the 22nd May this year. So it was approved in 2017, a couple of years for the implementation. Now it is in place. And this regulation says what? That genetic testing got a more severe level. This means that if you develop an LDT test, so a test that is developed in our lab, you need to have an ISO, that is 15189, that is the accreditation of your test. But if in the market there is a similar test for the same thing that is IVDR, this means that was already certified as a medical device, that is another ISO, that is 15485, you cannot use your LDT test. You need to use the CE IVDR certification that is in the market, okay? So what happened? All the companies are running to have this certification for their tests. But the CE IVDR certification asks for clinical validity, clinical utility. And what is clinical validity? Is to have a clinical trial. How can we have a clinical trial if we are using polygenic risk scores that came from approaches that are data-driven? That we are extracting this knowledge from populations of 1 million genomes. I cannot do a clinical trial with 1 million genomes. Okay? So this is labs are struggling with this. Labs need to have consensus on the polygenic risk scores, need to have more support from the research to prove to the technical agencies or to this kind of regulatory agencies that the data that's being used is accurate, because this is changing completely the framework. These agencies are used to deal with model-based research, not with data-driven research. They don't even understand the concept, okay? But the point is that there are companies looking at this, And one of the companies is a major company in the world, that is Illumina. And Illumina is going to launch an array by the end of this year that includes markers for polygenic risk score in cancer and cardiovascular disorders, and the kit will be CE-IVDR. So think about what this is going to do in Europe for all the labs that are using LDT tests that have been developed in their own labs. Okay? So this is a major thing that I would like to call your attention. To conclude, I would like to come again to artificial intelligence and to introduce GPT-3. GPT-3 is already old because in AI, this model, or this large language model was trained until 2019. It used a corpus of data that will take a human being 24 hours for 5,000 years to read everything that GPT used to learn. And, but I can ask natural language questions to this model. And look at the last question. I asked GPT-3, what is the role of artificial intelligence in personalized medicine? And the answer was, AI can play a key role in personalized medicine by helping to identify the best treatments for individual patients based on their genetic makeup and lifestyle. So these models are really creating concepts and models of this world, and they can help us to push and to propagate specific knowledge. So, and perhaps in a couple of years, we can start relying on the answers that these big models are giving to us. But we, at the same time, we need to understand how to implement this. That is quite difficult. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Anna. Time for questions. We have already a first candidate there.
Thank you for a very good presentation. I enjoyed it a lot. I work with personalized medicine and AI in an innovation arena for AI up in Sweden called IDA, and in the Big Picture project where we try to do AI for digital pathology in Europe. So access to medical and even clinical data, training data for AI is of course very important for what I want to accomplish for Sweden and for Europe. I was struck by a sentence and an argument you made in your presentation regarding informed consent. So this is something that keeps surfacing and keeps being mentioned as a huge blocker for access to health data for research, and I agree. Informed consent in the GDPR provides a legal basis for processing which you must have or you are breaking the law. But it's just one among many tools that can be used to provide a legal basis for processing. Another is if it's needed to perform a significant public interest, for instance, which is the legal basis for processing that we favor in the Nordic countries. So here we demonstrate that our processing is fulfilling a necessary and significant public interest because it was the plan for the research was evaluated by a national or regional ethical review board, which balanced the integrity breaches against the benefits to society and individuals and with the protective measures employed and so on and so forth. And their statement that yes, this is valid and ethical research that should be produced and it is worth the potential integrity breach into these individuals' lives. And as you say, very few people who are dying of cancer would like for their deaths to be meaningless. They want their deaths to be analyzed so others can be saved. So, and it's also a great hassle to maintain those informed consents and opt-outs and so on and so forth, which is why I never recommend people to use that in the first place. People who do shady things, like want to sell you stuff that you don't want or want to sell your information to third parties or whatever, they have a huge end-user license agreement where they describe all the shady stuff in complicated language. And you can click I accept at the bottom because you don't dare to do anything else. So if you use informed consent, then perhaps you will be thrown in with all those actors to be seen as weird and strange and shady when you're trying to do good AI for humanity, right? So I was wondering if I could get a few thoughts from you on how to move away from this constant talking about informed consent and moving into something more productive for research and, well, everyone's well-being in Europe.
No, thank you. Thank you for your comments, and you are completely right. And what I was trying to argument is that of course, the informed consent is needed, and or other measures are needed to protect people. But if we heard people, if we ask to the population is much more relaxed with these kind of tools than the people that are building the regulations. Okay, I think that we argue that informed consent is important, but at the end of the day, people are willing to share the data and to, that's my experience, and that depends on the geography. Of course, there are those things like we try to implement in Portugal, the dynamic informed consent, but it's a mess because then you ask 3 times a patient, and the 4th time the guy makes yes for all. Okay, and forget it. And the other thing is that when we download an app with the terms and consents or terms, are we reading that or we are just saying yes, 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 go and just want to use it?
Yes.
So perhaps we need to have the tools, but do not complicate them a lot. Not make really a big issue or a barrier to this, because at the end of the day, it's not a barrier.
Thank you.
Thank you. There in the middle, yeah.
Yeah. Hi, Jake Chen from University of Alabama at Birmingham. Thank you. I think you emphasized the polygenic risk score, and we all get it. And I wonder if you can comment that we should actually move away from a single modality and genetic-based way of approaching personalized medicine into just looking at the patient itself and then going backwards instead of going from one way. For example, if your car breaks down, it doesn't matter if it's the engine or starter. You look at this breaking down and then you try to fix it, whether it's genetics reasons or more, it could be microbiome, it could be anything, like especially in a psychiatric disorder, and the genetic is not that important. There's a lot of the behavioral and exposure. So I'd like to see your comment on maybe a different version of personalized medicine than you taught. Thank you.
Okay, I don't know if I completely understood what you like me to comment, but what I think is that if we are really moving forward with a personalized medicine approach, we really need to start with the person, okay? Even before the patient, we need to start with the person that is not sick at the time. So, and we already have a lot of data to understand a number of triggers to that person. Of course, this is quite difficult to implement. Why? Because we have different visions between what we would like medicine to be and what is going on in the daily basis. Because in the daily basis, doctors are being asked to see patients in 10 minutes. There is no way to develop personalized or preventive medicine in consultations of 10 minutes. Okay? So there's a pressure, some pressure from the clinics and from the hospitals to try to optimize and to stop this and to have examples like the examples that I presented from the Netherlands in the patient-centeredness of in Portugal. Those are the examples that show that if you stop a little bit and go a little bit back and look to the person, you can really define models and processes that optimize the cost and everything at the end. Okay, I don't know if it was on this direction that you would like me to comment.
We can discuss.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
Okay, thank you.
We have 5 more minutes and 2 questions, as far as I can see there in the back of the room first.
Thank you for your presentation. Maybe the question is, I mean, also with the collecting all the data, how I think we also need to develop very much better security to secure this data, because there have been actually more than one hack attack on like Uniclinics in Germany, for example. This happened in Düsseldorf.
3 in Portugal.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is very important. For example, I guess I can understand also the very strict regulations because also, for example, sharing this data with, for example, insurance companies. Because if you have genomic data and you know this person is going to have Huntington disease, then maybe his insurance premium is going to be very high. Or
How many persons will have it from the full population? It's not so high.
But I mean, I mean the insurance premium, when you know that this person is going to have a certain disease by their genetics, also this is kind of sometimes dangerous once you start.
It's true, but one of the things, just to discuss with you that point, one of the things that we are doing in Portugal, and we are involving insurance companies, is to partner with them on this preventive medicine approach. Because if you talk not about those genetic variants, of course, that are associated with Mendelian disorders, but if you talk about predispositions, you don't have 100% penetrance. And every one of us will have a predisposition for something. And insurance companies, they don't want to lose their clients. If they decide to act, they will lose everybody. So it's not a good idea to penalize clients.
But they might do. I would say the companies might still do penalize patients.
But
I mean, some already do. I mean, many private insurance companies, if they know that you already have a certain disease, they might not even take you as a client. So this might start happening once you have this personalized also.
So it not become worse than what it is already.
You have now more information to use it against the patient, maybe. Yeah.
I'm sure you can continue afterwards
Okay,
with
thank
this
you.
interesting
Thank you.
discussion. Okay,
No,
here in the middle. Yeah.
No, thank you for the talk. So in your talk, you had a lot of examples of EU regulations and how they impact. So I assume the Americans probably have their own regulations and the Canadians. So I just want, the question is, are we going to end up in a world where every little geography is going to have their own products because they're not compatible? You cannot sell European stuff in the US, vice versa.
It's what we're having nowadays. If an EU company wants to come to Europe nowadays, they need to comply with our regulation. That's what Illumina is doing. They don't need IVDR in the US, and they are transforming their products because they want to play a role in Europe. That's the point. For example, in the Latin America, Brazil, they decided to adapt the European regulation, okay? But in Latin America, the vision about using this data is completely different from Europe. And let me tell you that is very interesting because as a company, I need to go to other geographies. I'm in Portugal. We don't have a market in Portugal. We need to start there and go to the world if the company wants to sell. So I said, okay, let's go to other geographies in Europe. And perhaps these kind of tests are quite expensive, and in other geographies it will be more simple to use them. And what I saw is that it was more simple to sell them in Brazil than in Europe. And why? Because in Brazil they don't have a national healthcare system. So if you go to Brazil and you talk about preventive medicine, everybody is willing to pay out of pocket. Why? Because if they get sick, they know that they will die. So they really try to avoid disease. And they invest, you cannot imagine, people that really have a very low income, they invest a lot in nutrition, they invest a lot in behavior, because they are afraid to getting ill. And in Europe, we have more a behavior that if we get ill, okay, we go to the hospital, someone will solve the problem.
Thank you.
Before the last question there is one question from the audience by internet. Can you tell the audience all your mutations predisposing you to Alzheimer's disease? I guess not.
If you know, please let us know, because everybody wants to develop that genetic test. I don't know how they will use it. That will be a problem, because then you don't know the human behavior with that kind of information. But I don't think so.
Okay, and the final question?
So, thank you. I want to ask you a somewhat technical question about the way the polygenic risk scores have been promoted in your talk and often by others, in particular in companies. So you see the different deciles and you see the point estimates for every single one. And of course, confidence interval, I think you showed the 90% confidence interval, which you can make as small as you want if you have a large sample size, scales like 1 over square root n. And I think this can be a little bit, so I claim that if you have enough sample size, you will always get this kind of, deciles which are growing and the errors getting smaller and smaller. What is really important is the predictive value. And I think for this, it would be much more useful to show receiver operator characteristics,
where you can see how much you misclassify. That's what we really want to know. And then you want to compare this to other scores which are not genetic, like Framingham score, and see what is the gain that we have. Admittedly, in some you do, but I think some companies using this, and there's no gain over just taking the average over the two parents and use this as an estimator or a classifier as compared to the genetic contribution. So maybe you can comment on that.
Yes, so you're right. One of the things that this paper also presents is how the model explains the obesity in that specific population. And we can see that the penetrance is not 100%, but it explains more than the contributions of the other individual parameters. There are other papers that are even more recent that did the same work for cardiovascular disorders and can explain of coronary disease can be the score or a score for prediction of the risk can be improved using the polygenic risk score together, of course, with smoking, diabetes, obesity, and other things. Okay. Regarding that thing related to the combination of the parents, the point is that we need to know the individual. Sometimes we don't get the same, the siblings, they don't have the same genetic makeup, okay? So our siblings that could have more risk than just looking to the parents, okay? On that part, I cannot answer, but what I can tell you regarding the first part of your question is that there is data on those works that show that this explains more than just using independent parameters.
Okay, if I may ask the very last 30 seconds, you were, of course, I think that was very relevant about the clinical trials for algorithms. They are doing this already in the US for a while. So how do you see the funding agencies, for example, in Europe, jumping into that kind of financing clinical trials for algorithms and for polygenic risk scores? And
what we see is that the new framework for Horizon 2030 is more to the applied research. And this helps a lot because the point is that, in particular, I know many countries, and in Portugal is one of those examples, we can have access to funding for basic research. That is, of course, great and very relevant. But then we don't have access to research that is in a more higher TRL, and that can really push research to a level that then the market can take it to the ISTRL and sell it. So I would like to see more investments on that because, for two reasons, not only because we really need to, we have a lot of data being generated in research that is just there waiting for someone to look at that. And that we need to understand that this money, it's taxpayer money, so we need to give back to the society. People need to see in their lifetime something that happened from that money. And also because when we bring together researchers and people that are in the industry, it is very relevant for them to learn from each other because in the industry everything is very fast. We are full of daily issues that are difficult to deal with. And then in the research, we can have groups doing the basic research, but at the same time partnering with the ones that are giving that extra mile to put the data in a way that then the other ones can take it. I would like to see more funding, yeah. But I think that the new framework is investing more on that.
Okay, so thank you so much, Anna, for the amazing talk, and thank you all. Remember, you have now a poster session again, and you can start voting through the app. There is a button there that says poster awards or something like that. And there will be tomorrow more posters, but you can start already choosing your favorites. So a big applause for Anna.
Thank you.
I'm from X, you're from Y, perfect strangers in the night. Here we are, come together.